December 1944. The jungles of the Pacific were thick with humidity, the kind of heat that clung to the skin like a wet shroud. Japanese infantrymen moved quietly through the undergrowth, their rations nothing more than rice balls, hardened by the sun, pickled plums, or cans of fish. The war had stripped away comfort, leaving only necessity. And yet, from across the lines carried on the tropical breeze, came sounds that seemed impossible. Laughter, the clatter of mess kits, and most baffling of all, the faint scrape of spoons against metal. A stunned Japanese soldier later recorded what he saw. American troops, sitting casually in their camps, eating bowls of ice cream. In the middle of a war zone, in the oppressive jungles of the Pacific, where food often spoiled and water turned foul, the Americans were enjoying a treat more at home in a soda fountain than on a battlefield. To him it was not just strange, it was unthinkable. Ice cream in war? This was not an illusion, it was reality. The United States, halfway across the world, had managed to supply over 1 million troops with more than 135 million pounds of ice cream during the war. Not an occasional luxury, but a steady flow. For soldiers who faced death daily, ice cream became more than food. It became a symbol of home, of abundance, of morale itself. The contrast was staggering. Axis soldiers, Japanese, German, Italian, often subsisted on meager rations designed purely for survival. Bitter coffee, hard biscuits, watery stews, dried vegetables. These meals kept a soldier alive, but they offered little joy. For them, indulgence was a memory. For the Americans, indulgence was engineered into their war machine, and this mattered. Because war is not only fought with bullets, tanks, and planes. It is fought with the mind, the spirit, the will to keep going. When a weary GI in the Pacific took a bite of cold, creamy ice cream, he wasn't just tasting sugar and milk, he was tasting home. He was reminded of summer evenings, of family gatherings, of life beyond mud, blood, and steel. To the Japanese, it was almost insulting. How could an enemy so comfortable, so casual, so confident be defeated? If the Americans had the luxury to ship ice cream across oceans and into battle, what else could they do? Yet behind this small luxury lay a story of immense industrial and logistical power. Ice cream was not simply dropped from the sky. It required refrigeration plants, insulated containers, transport ships, portable freezers, and a command structure willing to prioritize morale on the same level as ammunition. To achieve this during a global conflict, when shipping space was scarce, resources stretched thin, and survival often hinged on efficiency, was nothing short of astounding, and it was deliberate. Military planners understood that morale was as critical as firepower. An army that ate well, that felt cared for, that could cling to some fragment of normal life, was an army that fought harder and endured longer. For America, ice cream became a weapon, not of destruction, but of endurance. So when Japanese soldiers watched their enemies savoring cold desserts in the middle of a sweltering jungle, they were witnessing more than a strange cultural habit. They were staring at proof of America's industrial muscle, its psychological insight, and its ability to fight a war not just with steel, but with spirit. But this raises a question that startled even Allied observers at the time. How did America manage it? How could a country fighting across 2 oceans create and maintain a system capable of delivering ice cream to millions of men in the harshest conditions of war? The answer lay not in the sweetness of sugar or the smoothness of cream, but in something hidden, something vast, something engineered deep within the machinery of war, and that hidden system was about to change the very meaning of supply in modern warfare. But what hidden system made this indulgent feat possible? On the eve of its full entry into the Second World War, the United States military stood in a strange place, strong in spirit, weak in preparation. Its army numbered just 1.4 million men, many of them untrained recruits scattered across dusty training fields. Its navy stretched itself across 2 oceans, but its lifeline, logistics, was fragile. Supplying even basic rations of beans, bread, and coffee strained the system. Luxuries like ice cream? That was unthinkable. The numbers painted a grim reality. In 1942 alone, German U-boats prowling the Atlantic sent over 12 million tons of Allied shipping to the bottom of the sea. Merchant ships laden with food, fuel, and weapons disappeared beneath the waves in fiery explosions. For every vessel sunk, thousands of miles of supply lines were severed, delaying reinforcements, starving units of essentials, and reminding commanders that logistics, not firepower, would decide the war. American rations reflected these early struggles. Soldiers carried K-rations, compact boxes containing canned meat, biscuits, powdered drinks, and candy. Practical, yes, but hardly appetizing. To the men in the field, these meals were monotonous, their flavors dull, their portions never quite enough. Complaints reached high command almost immediately. Officers realized that if America was to sustain a truly global fight, morale could not be left to chance. But who would solve this problem? The answer lay in a new breed of officer, logisticians. Not glamorous like fighter aces or tank commanders, they were the architects of supply. Men who thought in tonnage, routes, refrigeration, and morale. They asked questions no one else dared. How do you keep milk fresh on a troop ship crossing the Pacific? How do you deliver eggs to a jungle encampment without them spoiling? How do you make sure soldiers don't lose the will to fight before they ever meet the enemy? Even before Pearl Harbor, small initiatives emerged. Some commanders experimented with field bakeries to deliver fresh bread near the front. Others commissioned mobile kitchens, capable of serving hot meals in muddy encampments. These efforts were limited, fragile, often improvised, but they hinted at something larger. If America could feed its troops more than just survival food, it could feed them hope, and yet the obstacles loomed. Global war meant global scarcity. Steel was diverted to tanks, ships, and planes. Fuel was rationed at home and at sea. Every inch of cargo space had to be weighed between bullets and butter. The very thought of shipping ice cream halfway across the world seemed absurd. Still, whispers grew. Commanders noted how a simple hot meal boosted morale after weeks of cold rations. Psychologists observed that comfort foods restored not just the body, but the spirit. The war would demand unimaginable sacrifice, but perhaps it would also demand something more subtle, the art of keeping men human amid the inhumanity of battle. The world, however, was about to change overnight. On December 7, 1941, a devastating attack ripped through Pearl Harbor, plunging the United States fully into the conflict. Overnight, a hesitant military machine shifted into overdrive. Mobilization was no longer optional, it was survival. The fragile logistics that had struggled to feed a small army would now face the task of supplying millions across continents and oceans. It was a crisis. But hidden within that crisis was the seed of a revolution. The kind of revolution that would transform the American supply chain from fragile to unstoppable. The kind of revolution that would one day make the impossible, supplying soldiers with ice cream in the middle of a war, seem routine. Yet, a devastating attack would spark an unexpected revolution. What was it? The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly, an expanse of saltwater wilderness dotted with volcanic islands, coral reefs, and dense jungles. For the United States military, it was not just an arena of battle, it was a logistical nightmare. Every campaign, every landing, every push forward demanded staggering amounts of supplies, ferried across thousands of miles. Ammunition, fuel, medical gear, food. And food, more than anything, told the story of hardship. At Guadalcanal, one of the war's earliest and most brutal campaigns, the American soldiers' ration was as unforgiving as the climate. Private Harold Stevens of the 1st Marine Division wrote home about the endless cycle of canned meat, powdered drinks, and stale crackers. In the suffocating humidity, canned stew turned into a greasy lump, coffee powder clumped into bitter sludge. Men grew sick of the taste, sick of the monotony. They ate because they had to, not because they wanted to. A U.S. Army division in the Pacific required nearly 10,000 tons of supplies every month just to function. That meant convoys of ships snaking across shark-infested waters, vulnerable to submarines, aircraft, and storms. Each ton of supplies carried across the Pacific was a victory in itself. To keep a single Marine alive in a foxhole on Guadalcanal, countless sailors and logisticians risked their lives. The Japanese, by comparison, operated on leaner margins. Their soldiers lived mostly on rice, dried fish, and pickled vegetables. Simpler rations meant lighter supply needs, but it also meant weaker morale. Japanese troops endured hunger and deprivation with discipline, yet the lack of variety gnawed at their strength. They fought fiercely, but behind their discipline lay a hunger that no ration of rice could satisfy. America's planners recognized this contrast. They saw the suffering of their own men, weary of canned food, and they asked a bold question: could comfort be delivered across an ocean? Could morale itself be shipped, frozen, and served in places where even clean drinking water was rare? It was a gamble of imagination as much as logistics. Soldiers weren't machines. They were young men far from home, barely out of school, surrounded by disease, heat, and death. If the only relief they had was a tin of Spam or a cracker that crumbled into dust, how long could their spirits last? The Pacific was merciless. Supply ships faced the constant threat of Japanese submarines lurking in the deep. Tropical storms scattered convoys and ruined fragile cargo. Even when supplies reached the beach, unloading them under enemy fire meant chaos. Grates floated ashore, food spoiled in the sun, refrigeration broke down. Soldiers joked grimly that by the time food reached the front, it had been handled by more men than they had enemies. And yet, amid this chaos, the United States dared to think differently. Commanders began to realize that comfort foods were not indulgence, they were strategy. A candy bar could restore energy, a hot meal could rebuild morale, and an impossible dream, ice cream in the jungle, could remind soldiers of the world they were fighting to protect. The Pacific Challenge was more than a matter of distance. It was a question of will. Could America overcome not only the enemy, but also the very environment itself? Could it supply not only calories, but hope? This was the test of 1942, across endless seas, in steaming jungles, with supply lines stretched to the breaking point. America's logistical revolution faced its harshest trial. Could America deliver comfort to its troops in such hostile conditions? By 1944, the United States had begun to answer the impossible question: how do you deliver comfort to men scattered across the farthest reaches of the Pacific? The solution came not in the form of new weapons or larger ships, but in something far more unusual: ice cream. It began with experiments in refrigeration. Engineers designed portable cooling units that could be loaded onto ships and carried forward with the fleet. At first, these units kept meat and dairy fresh, a vast improvement over salted rations. But soon, planners realized they could go further. Why stop at survival food when they could provide luxury? Why not give soldiers a taste of home, something that would lift their spirits, even as battles dragged into weeks and months? The answer was the ice cream barge. Anchored in harbors across the Pacific, these floating factories turned out endless streams of frozen dessert. The most famous model could churn out 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 seconds. By the end of a single day, thousands of servicemen could line up, tin cup in hand, and receive a cold scoop under the blazing tropical sun. It was a sight both ordinary and extraordinary. Young men, uniforms still stained from combat, smiling over something as simple as vanilla ice cream. For the Japanese, the concept was inconceivable. Their supply chains were rigid, designed only to keep soldiers alive with rice and dried fish. There was no thought of luxury, no margin for indulgence. A Japanese officer reportedly wrote of his disbelief, "The Americans, they give their men ice cream, as though they were children at a festival. To him it was wasteful, absurd." Yet it revealed a truth about the two enemies. Japan fought with discipline and sacrifice. America fought with abundance and the will to keep men's spirits unbroken. The scale of this operation was staggering. The Navy didn't just deploy barges. It modified entire ships with refrigeration plants. Fleet carriers, battleships, even destroyers carried units capable of producing and storing ice cream. Men rotated through in shifts, and each got his turn at the mess deck's most cherished line. For a moment, a soldier could forget malaria, mud, and enemy shells. He could close his eyes and taste something that felt like home. But this was more than morale. It was strategy. Commanders knew that troops who felt cared for fought harder, lasted longer, and recovered faster. In the psychological war between enemies, the image of Americans eating ice cream while their opponents gnawed on rice was powerful. It sent a message both to their own men and to the enemy. We can afford to do this. Our resources are limitless. Our will cannot be broken. Still, the system was fragile. Refrigeration required fuel, maintenance, and careful protection. Ice cream barges could not sail alone. They needed escorts. Portable freezers could break down. In the chaos of war, was this sweet indulgence sustainable? Could the Navy keep this morale machine running while facing kamikazes, submarines, and the constant demand for munitions? For now, the answer was yes. In harbor after harbor, soldiers remembered the taste of cold sweetness in the heat of battle. And as word spread, so too did the legend. America, the country that fought with tanks, planes, and bombs. And also with ice cream, but with this sweet strategy holed up under the strain of war. Behind every scoop of ice cream in a soldier's mess tin stood an invisible army. An army not in uniform, but in overalls, aprons, and factory smocks. They were the workers who turned milk into powder, who packed crates of sugar, who loaded ships at midnight docks. They were the men and women, many of them minorities, many of them far from the battlefields, who carried the weight of morale on their shoulders. By 1944, America had shipped over 650,000 tons of dairy products overseas. Ice cream, powdered milk, butter, and cheese flowed through ports in California, Texas, and New York, crossing oceans where danger lurked beneath the waves. Each crate bore the fingerprints of farmers, drivers, factory hands, and sailors who would never see the Pacific Islands where their efforts mattered most. For many of these workers, the task was deeply personal. A woman working long shifts in a Wisconsin dairy plant put it simply, "Every gallon we send is a taste of home for the boys. If it makes them smile, it's worth every hour we stand here." Her words echoed across thousands of production lines, where ordinary Americans poured extraordinary energy into something as fleeting and yet as vital as ice cream. The labor was not without challenge. Refrigeration units broke down in the sweltering heat of the South Pacific. Freezers overloaded during long voyages. Ships carrying dairy cargo drew the attention of enemy submarines, their sinking not only a military loss but a morale blow. Sailors tasked with maintaining the cold chain worked tirelessly, checking gauges, patching pipes, and sometimes improvising repairs with scrap metal to keep the ice cream flowing. For minority workers, the effort carried double meaning. African-American dock workers on the West Coast loaded milk and sugar onto cargo ships, knowing their labor helped brothers, cousins, and neighbors fighting overseas. Filipino and Mexican laborers in California dairies kept the supply lines moving, while Native American workers contributed to the transport and processing of milk. They were rarely recognized in headlines, but without them, the promise of ice cream for the troops would have melted away before it ever reached the front. Sailors, too, became guardians of the cold. On converted ice cream barges, crews worked shifts around the clock, monitoring machinery that produced 10 gallons of ice cream every 7 seconds. When storms rolled across the Pacific, they lashed equipment down and prayed the refrigeration units held. When enemy aircraft attacked, they defended their floating factories with anti-aircraft guns, knowing that their mission was as important to morale as any battleship's broadside, and there was pride in this mission. For many who worked the lines, the knowledge that a simple scoop of vanilla could bring a soldier back to memories of home was enough to keep them going through fatigue and danger. A sailor aboard an ice cream barge near the Marshall Islands recalled, "We weren't gunners or pilots, but when those boys lined up smiling, we knew we were fighting the war in our own way." This web of effort, stretching from Midwestern farms to Pacific atolls, wove together into something greater than food. It was a symbol of American resolve, proof that the nation could harness not only its weapons, but also its comforts in the service of victory. But where would this morale machine prove its worth most clearly? The answer would come in one of the most brutal and decisive campaigns of the war, where ice cream's presence became not just a luxury, but a lifeline. As ice cream flowed, one campaign would showcase its impact. What was it? The Pacific was on fire. From Saipan to Peleliu, the jungles and beaches became crucibles of suffering. Heat, disease, and relentless combat drained men as much as bullets and shells. Yet in the middle of this grueling theater, something unexpected spread across the ranks of American troops, an oasis of morale in the form of ice cream. By this year, America had perfected the system. Ice cream barges, numbering nearly 1,500 across the Pacific, churned out gallons day and night. Portable refrigeration units aboard supply ships and carriers kept the flow steady. From the Marshalls to the Marianas, the frozen dessert found its way into foxholes, onto mess trays, and into the hands of men who had gone weeks without comfort. On Saipan, the battle raged for weeks. The terrain was brutal, lava rock, razor-sharp cliffs, suffocating heat. Casualties mounted daily. Marines pushed inland against determined Japanese defenders who refused to surrender. Amid this carnage, one GI later wrote of the moment ice cream reached their unit. "We had lost friends. We hadn't slept. Our clothes were stiff with salt and blood. And then someone handed me a scoop of ice cream. For a few minutes I wasn't in Saipan. I was home again." It was not the sweetness of the dessert that struck him most. It was the reminder that someone, somewhere, cared enough to send it. In the darkest days, a single scoop became a lifeline. Even the enemy noticed. Japanese soldiers, searching through captured U.S. supplies, were baffled by the presence of refrigeration units and stocks of dairy products. To them, this seemed impossible. How could a nation so far from home, fighting across oceans, still deliver luxuries their own army could not imagine? One captured diary contained a stunned note: "The Americans, even in battle, they eat ice cream." It was written not in envy, but in disbelief, proof of a war machine whose resources seemed limitless. For the Americans, the scale of this achievement was staggering. Supplying over 1 million troops in the Pacific with ice cream required more than factories and barges. It required vision. Generals understood that morale was ammunition. A soldier who felt cared for, who tasted a memory of home, could march farther, fight longer, and endure more. Psychologists attached to the army reinforced this view. They noted that comfort foods helped stave off what was then called battle fatigue, the crushing exhaustion and emotional collapse that haunted men under fire. Ice cream was not just calories. It was medicine for the spirit. The miracle lay in its timing. At the very moment when battles like Saipan threatened to break men with relentless attrition, the arrival of ice cream sent a different message: you are not forgotten. America's industrial machine had reached across an ocean to remind its soldiers of normal life. For many, this morale boost turned into resolve. In foxholes and trenches, men shared stories of the ice cream they'd eaten as boys, of the soda fountains they hoped to return to, of the lives waiting for them after victory. The war was still brutal, still deadly, but now the burden was lighter. The dessert carried weight far beyond its flavor. To the enemy, it was another symbol of American abundance. To the Americans, it was proof that even in war, humanity could be preserved. The sweet miracle of 1944 wasn't about dairy, it was about endurance. But how did this dessert reshape the war's momentum? October 1944. The Philippine Sea was a theater of titanic conflict. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was unfolding, one of the largest naval battles in history. And yet, amid the thunder of guns and the roar of aircraft, another force quietly shaped the outcome. Morale. Not artillery, not armor, but comfort. Ice cream had become more than a treat. By now, it was a symbol of care, a psychological lever that kept men fighting when exhaustion threatened to break them. Surveys conducted among troops revealed that over 80% reported higher spirits when small comforts, like chocolate, coffee, and yes, ice cream, were available. In the midst of chaos, a bowl of vanilla or chocolate became an anchor, a brief reprieve from the relentless grind of battle on Leyte. American sailors and Marines faced conditions that would have crushed the unprepared. Long hours, tropical heat, and the constant fear of kamikaze attacks tested every ounce of endurance. Yet reports from the field highlighted an unexpected ally: morale. One officer reflected on the scene aboard a troop ship. Our men line up for ice cream with the same eagerness they bring to battle. It's a small thing, but it binds them together. It reminds them what they fight for. The contrast with the Japanese was stark. Japanese troops, isolated and often starving, had no such luxuries. Their rations were austere, sometimes non-existent. Letters recovered from the front told stories of men eating raw rice in silence, their spirits eroded by hunger and fatigue. The absence of comfort was not merely physical, it was psychological. Every bite of ice cream that American troops enjoyed was a reminder of abundance, a subtle weapon that eroded the enemy's will to fight. This edge was tangible. Soldiers who had access to small comforts maintained focus, cooperated more effectively in operations, and recovered faster from physical and emotional stress. Ice cream, chocolate, and coffee became tools of endurance. In foxholes, on barges, in field kitchens, these simple pleasures reminded men that they were part of a nation that cared, and that victory was worth the hardship. Logistically, the system continued to amaze. By late 1944, thousands of ice cream barges and portable freezers were operating across the Pacific, feeding millions. Crews maintained refrigeration under tropical storms, machine failures, and enemy fire. Each scoop delivered was a triumph of planning, engineering, and human ingenuity. To the enemy, the sight was demoralizing. Captured supplies, well-stocked mess halls, and tales of American soldiers enjoying desserts in the heart of war created disbelief, a psychological blow that compounded the battlefield pressure. One Japanese officer noted in his journal, "These men fight with steel and sugar alike. Their resolve is fortified not only by guns, but by what they eat." Ice cream was more than indulgence. It was a binding force, a morale multiplier, a strategic tool hidden in plain sight. It reminded Americans that victory was not only about winning battles, but sustaining the spirit of those who fought them. And yet, this sweet victory came at a cost. Resources diverted to morale, complex logistics stretched to the breaking point, and lives risked maintaining the flow of comforts all had consequences. For every scoop delivered, sacrifices, sometimes invisible, were made in the shadows of the war machine. Yet, this sweet victory came at a cost. What was the price? The sweetness of ice cream came at a bitter price. Every gallon, every scoop delivered to the front lines carried hidden sacrifices, invisible to the men savoring it. Behind the smiles and laughter of soldiers lay danger, fatigue, and the grim reality of war. By 1944, over 1,200 Allied merchant ships had been sunk by German U-boats in the Atlantic alone. Each vessel carried not only ammunition and medical supplies, but also food, ice cream, and other morale boosters. Sailors transporting these precious goods faced storms, torpedoes, and enemy aircraft, all while maintaining the delicate cold chain necessary to prevent spoilage. The threat was constant. One misstep could result in loss of life and the ruin of months of painstaking planning. Among these men was Chief Petty Officer Samuel Rhodes, a veteran sailor tasked with delivering ice cream to a Pacific Island encampment under heavy enemy fire. He recalled later, "We were under attack, shells raining down, yet the freezers had to stay running. One scoop for the men, if it melted, morale sank. We risked our lives to keep it cold, and somehow we did. I've never seen grown men fight so fiercely after a single bite of ice cream. On shore, the factories that produced these rations were no less heroic. Workers toiled long shifts in sweltering plants, handling tens of thousands of pounds of milk, sugar, and cream. Exhaustion was constant, yet they pressed on, aware that their labor reached men thousands of miles away, sustaining their courage and resilience. Women and minorities filled these essential roles, their contributions critical to the larger war effort, yet largely unheralded in the press. The moral calculus was complex. Diverting resources to comfort in the midst of global devastation raised questions among planners and politicians alike. Every gallon of ice cream required ships, fuel, refrigeration equipment, and manpower, resources that could otherwise supply weapons, ammunition, or medical aid. Yet the decision to prioritize soldier welfare was intentional, rooted in the belief that morale was as critical to victory as artillery. This calculus was tested constantly. Hurricanes in the Pacific threatened to destroy entire shipments. Submarines prowled the shipping lanes. Refrigeration units malfunctioned in tropical heat. Every successful delivery was a triumph of planning, skill, and sheer courage. For every joyous soldier holding a tin cup, there were dozens of unseen hands that had made that moment possible, often at great personal risk. The psychological impact of these sacrifices was undeniable. Soldiers who received these comforts fought with renewed vigor, their spirits buoyed by a reminder that they were remembered, that someone had invested effort in their well-being. Ice cream, in essence, became a weapon of morale, a force multiplier that kept men alive not only in body but in mind and spirit. And yet, for all its sweetness, the cost remained heavy. The war demanded continuous calculation. How much comfort could be afforded without endangering operational effectiveness? How many lives risked delivering morale? Each scoop was a reminder that even joy in war carries a price. The story of ice cream in the Second World War, then, is not only one of ingenuity and delight, it is also one of sacrifice, courage, and moral reckoning. Every serving reflected a chain of efforts, risks, and decisions made thousands of miles from the front lines, shaping the human experience of combat in ways that bullets and bombs alone could not. But how did this logistical triumph redefine America's legacy? By 1945, the war had reached its final brutal stages. From the jungles of the Pacific to the rubble-strewn streets of Europe, Allied forces pushed relentlessly, and victory drew near. Yet amid the devastation, one curious and heartening statistic stood out. Over 135 million pounds of ice cream had been delivered to troops worldwide. It was more than a novelty. It was a cornerstone of a logistical revolution that demonstrated how human care could be engineered into a war machine. The impact on morale was profound. Soldiers across countless islands and battlefields remembered those small, fleeting moments of delight. The cold sweetness of vanilla on a scorched tongue, the creamy chocolate that brought a fleeting taste of home. One veteran, reflecting decades later, recalled sharing a scoop with his fellow Marines under the sweltering sun of Okinawa. It wasn't just ice cream. It was a reminder that we weren't forgotten, that someone cared. We fought harder that day, not because of orders, but because we felt alive. This commitment to soldier welfare reshaped military logistics forever. Prioritizing morale alongside ammunition, rations, and medical care became a lesson that reverberated long after the war ended. Supply chains were no longer just mechanical operations. They were systems designed to sustain the human spirit. The success of ice cream deliveries highlighted the importance of flexibility, innovation, and imagination in logistics, proving that the soft power of comfort could influence outcomes as decisively as the hard power of weapons. The cultural ripple extended beyond the battlefield. Returning soldiers brought memories of these small comforts home, shaping American society in unexpected ways. Ice cream became a symbol of abundance, of ingenuity, and of care. Post-war, it helped define the suburban experience, the soda fountain culture, and even the modern conception of troop welfare programs. What had begun as a tactical decision in the Pacific became a lasting legacy in both military planning and civilian life. Even for the enemy, the phenomenon left its mark. Japanese and German soldiers, reflecting on captured supplies or distant reports, could not fathom the idea of deliberate indulgence in wartime. America's choice to feed not just bodies, but morale, became a subtle but undeniable sign of industrial and psychological superiority, a reminder that victory often rests on the smallest of human comforts. The numbers tell part of the story, but the memories tell the rest. A single scoop of ice cream in the middle of war could revive hope, rekindle courage, and strengthen bonds between men facing death together. The legacy of these efforts lies not only in logistical records or tonnage shipped, but in the human hearts lifted by acts of care that spanned oceans, storms, and battlefields. By the end of the war, ice cream had become more than a dessert. It had become a symbol of what sustained victory truly required: ingenuity, dedication, and the will to fight for not only strategy and territory, but for the spirit of those who carried the fight. Could the lessons of this sweet feat still inspire us today? Long after the last shots of World War II echoed across the Pacific and Europe, the story of ice cream in combat endured, not as a trivial anecdote, but as a lesson in ingenuity, care, and the power of morale. What began as a daring experiment to comfort men in the heat of battle evolved into a blueprint for human-centered logistics, shaping the way nations and organizations think about sustaining people under pressure. In modern disaster relief, the echoes of this innovation are unmistakable. Aid workers understand that feeding the body is not enough. Restoring hope, dignity, and comfort can be just as critical. Portable refrigeration, rapid supply chains, and creative morale boosters draw from the same principles that once ensured that a Marine on Saipan could hold a cold scoop of vanilla in a sweltering jungle and feel, for a moment, safe, remembered, alive. Even today, in workplaces and high-pressure environments, the lessons of the ice cream operation resonate. Small acts of care, timely rewards, and attention to human needs can boost performance, foster resilience, and bind teams together. The same logic that guided U.S. logisticians across thousands of miles: anticipate the need, plan meticulously, deliver consistently, applies wherever people face stress and expectation. Comfort, morale, and ingenuity are tools, sometimes more potent than the most obvious instruments of power. The human story behind the logistics remains the most compelling. Farmers, factory workers, dockhands, sailors, women, men, and minorities all contributed to a chain of effort that turned disbelief into delight. Each gallon of ice cream was a triumph of coordination and courage. Each scoop was proof that a nation could fight a war, not only with firepower, but with thoughtfulness, creativity, and care for its people. Consider the countless sailors who navigated dangerous waters to deliver perishable cargo, the factory hands who labored for hours to churn the sweet treat, the officers who understood that morale was as strategic as any battlefield maneuver. Their combined efforts redefined what victory could mean. It was not only the conquest of territory, but the preservation of humanity in the face of destruction. The ice cream initiative also left an enduring mark on military culture. It demonstrated that morale is measurable, that human needs can and should be engineered into operational plans, and that small comforts can ripple across strategy, performance, and the psychology of war. This lesson, born of ingenuity under pressure, continues to inspire logistics professionals, leaders, and planners around the world. And yet, at its heart, the story is simple. In the heat of the Pacific, amid gunfire and exhaustion, a soldier could pause to enjoy something as ordinary as ice cream. and in doing so, feel extraordinary. It reminds us that ingenuity alone is not enough. Compassion, care, and attention to the human spirit transform strategy into triumph. The flavor of that victory is both literal and metaphorical. It is the sweetness of effort, the chill of courage, and the creamy reminder that even in extreme circumstances, human ingenuity can lift spirits, unite teams, and carry a mission across impossible distances. And so, the taste of that wartime ice cream reminds us, even in the darkest battles, care and ingenuity prevail.